Hi, this is Jeff Carpenter, Technology Evangelist here at DataStax, and I'm live in the studio with David Gilardi. We also have on the phone Luke Tillman from Denver, Colorado,
Hey
joining
guys, hello
us.
from Denver.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, Luke.
So, we wanted to talk a little bit today about KillrVideo, the application, what it is, why it exists, why you should care. So, Dave's going to kick us off with our first question. We have a few questions for you, Luke, about how this thing came to be.
All right.
Yeah,
cool.
let's do it.
All right. So, Luke. Hi, Luke. So, why did you create KillrVideo? Let's start it off with something fun.
So the history of KillrVideo is actually kind of interesting. So when I joined DataStax maybe about 3.5 years ago at the time, I was coming from a software engineering background, and our chief evangelist, Patrick McFadden, who is our bosses, all of our boss, he said, hey, why don't you come and be an evangelist? And I said, well, what's an evangelist, first of all? And after he kind of described it to me and whatnot, I said, I don't really have a great background. At this point, I had some experience with Apache Cassandra, but I really hadn't had any exposure to DataStax Enterprise. And I said to him, well, if I'm going to go out and I'm going to try and teach people how to use Cassandra and how to use DSC, it's something that I really need to, first of all, ramp up on, and then I got to believe in it, because I want to be effective as an evangelist. It's got to be a piece of technology that I actually believe in. And so he kind of suggested that I go off and I build a real application. And at the time, he had these slides from a talk that he was giving on this demo I guess made up application that he called KillrVideo. And the idea was, it's basically like YouTube. And the nice thing about that is that that's kind of like a business domain that everybody sort of understands, because everybody's kind of spent some time, on YouTube at this point in their careers. And so we decided it would be cool to actually go off and really build this thing. And not only in the process would I get to learn what it's like to build a real application on top of something like DataStax Enterprise, I would also then be able to take that code and turn it into something open source. And hopefully other developers who maybe are coming from a software engineering background like mine, which is relational databases, they would understand, through example, kind of what it is, how it is you work with this thing, how it is you build something real on top of DataStax Enterprise.
After all this time of working with KillrVideo and talking to Luke about this, I never realized that Patrick was the actual start of it. I always thought the KillrVideo thing was your brainchild, and I already hold you in such terribly high regard, but it's knocked you down just a slight notch. I just want
So he actually, he actually owned he thought that this was going to be something someday. It was just slides, and I can even give you guys a copy of the slide deck from circa maybe 2014 or something like that he was using. But he even registered the domain name, and this is KillrVideo without an E. So he thought this was going to become a thing. He even had the foresight to register the domain name at the time. So
very good. Yeah. So this is a great app, and it's a great learning tool for someone who's getting started. But where do they get started? I mean, let's say I want to jump in and I want to learn how to use DataStax Enterprise using the KillrVideo. I mean, how do I even get started and jump into it, Luke?
Well, nowadays we have some pretty great documentation now. So when I first put this together, 3 years ago, documentation was lacking, and it was a very different beast at the time. And I think, at some point we may talk about, kind of what it was originally and what it is now. But there's some really great documentation. So we have a github.io site, killervideo.github.io, and you can go on there, and there are docs for how to get started, kind of how to jump in, and kind of find out, well, where does the actual, if I'm trying to learn how do I interact with DSE, what are the best practices for interacting with DSE? How do I do a query? How do I do queries in parallel? How do I do, all of these different things? it kind of will direct you to where the interesting code in the project lives. Because at the end of the day, this is a full-blown application, so it does have some, kind of cognitive overhead of, being having an application stack that you may or may not be familiar with also. So hopefully that documentation will point you to some of the more interesting parts where if you just want to see kind of the DSE related stuff, you'll know where to go look.
Perfect. So that's, and I've been there. I had to go, when I first started working on the app, I had to go, like, where's the meat? Okay, so where's the actual queries? And it's very interesting because there's a pretty narrow slice of the application in the service implementations where all that DSE interaction lives. And it's honestly, a relatively small percentage of the overall code base. Yeah. So that being said, this isn't just a way to learn DSE and interactions with DataStax and Apache Cassandra. I mean, it's a legitimate distributed application, multi-tier web application on top of microservices, etc. So
that's because Luke rocks.
Yes.
Yeah. That's why.
He just spins magic. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the other technology choices that you made, because once you had selected your data tier, that's just the beginning, right, of everything else that you had to layer on top of that. So how do you come to make those choices?
Yeah, it's like anything in it's funny talking about technology choices. Like it's like any technology choice that you make it, and then some of them you regret later.
Oh wait, are we going to get into the regrets right now? Are you gonna...
We can totally talk regrets. In fact, I have to mention one in particular. But so I guess first thing we did, when we kind of we had an existing application that I did, maybe 3 years ago, and we were trying to get to more of a microservices architecture, and so we had some kind of boxes that we needed to tick. So one of those, for example, was, what do we want our service contracts? How are we going to do contracts for our services, knowing that the goal is that our actual services themselves, our microservices on the back end, are going to be implemented in different programming languages. Now, for us being a reference application, it was because we want to do the full suite of services that are in there in each programming language. In a real application, though, that's a problem they have as well. So you might be a primarily Java shop or something like that, but you're you might decide that all of a sudden this other service that you want to do, that would be great to do in Go, or that would be great to do in Node.js, or, oh man, F# is such a great, functional language, and this is a really great functional problem. Why wouldn't we do this in F# with .NET or something like that? And so people end up, whether through technology choices or sometimes it's acquisition, right? So at the last company I was at, we had that problem all the time of we were one acquisition away from, going from a primarily .NET shop to a .NET and Java and Python and all of these other kind of technologies. So it's a problem people have in the real world as well. So we needed some way to kind of do those service contracts in sort of a universal way that could give us, kind of typed APIs, in these typed languages, and worked across multiple programming languages. And so, we kind of looked around, and there's some players and things like that. Thrift, which people who know anything about Cassandra will know. Thrift was actually the original way that you used to interact with
that's
Cassandra.
right.
But it's also, a kind of a way of doing RPC, if you're going to kind of offer microservice via RPC. We could have done REST endpoints with HTTP and JSON. We kind of ended up settling, though, on gRPC, which was this brand new framework. It was in beta at the time when we were looking at it, that let us use protocol buffers to define our contracts and then consume those or generate service code and whatnot in multiple programming languages. So we had that. On the front end, we had things like React and an Express Node.js backend, because we wanted a reusable kind of web server that could be reused by multiple microservice implementations under the covers. And then we had to figure out how to spin up infrastructure as well. So Docker, right, is what we ended up settling on as far as the way to we've got these other dependencies, these other things that we need beyond just a node of DataStax Enterprise. How do we stand up like a full application stack for a developer to like try out
as quickly as possible?
Yeah, as quickly as possible and as simply as possible, right? We didn't want them to have to follow 10 or 12 steps and install 16 different things. And, like that was just kind of a barrier to entry when we really wanted them to be able to be up and running as quick as possible and, be able to jump in and throw breakpoints in their editor of choice and really kind of step through code and see what was going on. So, yep.
Yeah, and in all honesty, too, from that standpoint, from the ability to be able to get things stood up quickly for an end developer who doesn't know anything about the front end, the microservices architecture, any of that stuff. Right now, what you've got, actually what you created, it's going to sound like I'm just totally beefing him up, but it serves that purpose, because I've actually been going through, and we're going to talk about this, I know, in a minute, but I've been going through, deploying this all out in the DataStax Managed Cloud and everything, and having to account for those services in a more real-world setup compared to being able to contain it all in Docker and stuff. Huge. There's a huge amount of stuff going on in that app, right? It's a real app. So
it's real, all right.
Oh yeah, real, totally real. But I mean, I could download the thing in Docker and have it running in 2 hours, easy. So it's a big deal. What were you gonna say, Luke? Sorry.
I was going to say we mentioned technology choice that I regret.
Which one is it, Luke? Which one?
So one thing that one problem that we needed to solve was how does our front end, like our React app, single page app that's on running in a browser, how does that talk to the backend web server, and then that backend web server then fans out to the various microservices that we were doing with gRPC. And so what I ended up doing was I chose Falcor, which is a library from Netflix, and it provides a client component that kind of sits in the React UI and talks to a web server on the back end, and then it has this router component that sits on the web server and can fan out requests to various microservices. And if I had it to do all over again, I probably would have chosen something maybe like GraphQL from Facebook, which actually came out right around the same time as Falcor. They both kind of got open sourced right around the same time, and they were both kind of trying to solve a similar problem. And the reasoning being, Falcor just hasn't seen the uptick or uptake, I guess, in kind of interest, people actually using it out in the wild that you've seen with GraphQL. It's gotten a lot of adoption, a lot of people embracing it. In fact, in another project that I'm working on now, we're actually using GraphQL for that purpose. So lesson learned.
Now, we'd like to bring you back in to redo our front end, Luke, in GraphQL now.
Hey, could you just retool the whole thing? Thanks.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey,
we have that by tomorrow.
I mean, that's not, you can definitely get value out of the KillrVideo app without going and learning Falcor. That's not a prerequisite to being able to engage with it. But that being said, it's also a legitimate example of a real world application. Perfect example for you to look at.
Yep. The web UI all runs in Docker, and you don't even have to think about it when you're trying out the microservices implementation. But if you wanted to go look at that code, it is all open source.
Yeah, so I was going to make a point similar to that. I totally cut you off, Luke. Sorry, but I was going to. You're done now. No, I was totally going to make a point about that because I mean, throughout the KillrVideo project, right, I've had to look at all the different language implementations. C#, Node.js, Java, and what's awesome about it is, from what you just stated there, I didn't have to touch the web UI. I didn't have to do any. I mean, it's all there. It's seamless, and that's actually quite powerful. That's good stuff. So overall, I guess once now you got KillrVideo out there, you've got these different language implementations. I know you guys you have documentation. There's been some. I think you've done some talks and everything. Like, what's been the response, and that you've gotten from KillrVideo? Once you got it out there and that kind of deal.
It's been, I would say it's been an overwhelmingly positive experience. So, there's the cool thing of, having an open source project. At the time we didn't have a KillrVideo organization on GitHub, so the original implementation that was just in C# lived, under my personal account on GitHub. And over time it started getting forked and it starts getting stars, and that's kind of cool. Like you're starting to see people like show some interest, cloning the repo and trying it out. So that's been really cool. But really, like it's led to some really cool things. So for example, Cassandra Summit a couple of years ago, we got my colleague at the time, John Haddad, and I got to go on stage in front of like 4,000 of our closest friends, and we're there, on stage with Scott Guthrie from Microsoft, who's like a longtime nerd hero of mine. So like that was super cool anyway, because I was a .NET background guy, and we got to like present as part of the keynote about this project and trying to get people excited, and the feedback from that was overwhelmingly positive. And then also going around and just doing training events, things like Cassandra Days that we used to do all the time, and now the DataStax Live training events. Like the nice thing about KillrVideo is, partly that domain, that business domain of like, it's kind of like YouTube, and it's given us kind of freedom with some of our training materials to go off and play in that world and do things. And at the end of the day, be like, and if you want to see real code for some of this stuff, you can go check that out. And there are so many people that learn that way. They want to see example code. And so, for them to come up and be able to say like, wow, that really helped me. Like I had a guy come up to me once and say, I took this one function out of your app and I just copied and pasted it, modified it a little bit, and was able to like do exactly what I wanted it to do, just based on your example code. And that's pretty cool that people are going out there
like
and
Stack
like
Overflow of Cassandra.
Yeah, exactly. But that's pretty cool, that somebody took something that I did to try and help them learn, and was able to like put it in their own product or use it in their own application.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. So I know we've kind of touched on some of the areas. You've given us kind of like a history of where KillrVideo started and where it's gone to. So what kind of things have changed over time? I think at one time, wasn't it deployed up in Azure? And I mean, like I said, you've already kind of hinted at some aspects. Can you give us kind of like an overall timeline of what things have changed over time?
Yeah. The biggest change was, like I just mentioned before, like we were part of the keynote at Cassandra Summit, and when we were on stage talking about KillrVideo, at that point, KillrVideo was it was only available in C#. It was a .NET application. We had some kind of Azure specific parts because we ran a live demo of it in Azure. We were, for example, using Azure Media Services to allow for users to actually upload videos into the UI, and then Azure Media Services would take that source video and transcode it into all these other formats that could then be kind of played back on the web.
And you had to watch those? Like you had to watch all those videos for quality control?
Actually, that's funny you say that. We did at one point have a problem with people going onto the live demo site, like spamming like borderline inappropriate like
work from home
videos, like borderline inappropriate videos. Wow. And we were like, man, what are we gonna do? Like, do we have to actually put content like filters in place? And wow, that's like a whole other thing. But
we may be asking that question here again soon, actually.
yeah. Be wary. Yeah. So people, at the time though, it was very much sort of a modular monolith. We had services, in the .NET version, but everything ran in process together. And so really it was after that keynote that, we sat down and we kind of were like, we really need to get this into other programming languages. What can we do, to have a Java version, to have a Node.js version, things like that. And so that's when we really made the move to, okay, let's, we've kind of got these service contracts already defined in the .NET version. Let's go and look at some other pieces of technology. Let's, kind of make this not .NET specific. What are some ways that we can do that? And how do we get ourselves to the point where, a developer who wants to learn can learn in the programming language that they are most comfortable with? So that's kind of that was kind of the impetus to moving to things like gRPC and a reusable front end and that kind of thing. And so, and now as we're speaking, we've got, I think, 3 different language implementations, which is awesome. We definitely got there eventually. It just took some time.
Nice. So this has been a really good, I think, overview of the history of the project of KillrVideo and where we've been. I think in our next episode after this, Luke is going to turn the tables on us. He's handed over the reins on this application, his baby. He's turned it over to David and I.
I'm sorry, Luke.
We've wreaked a little bit of havoc with it. So we're going to give him a chance to hold us to account for things that we've been doing to the KillrVideo application. So stay tuned. And in our next video, we'll talk through some of where KillrVideo is going. Thanks.